The woman who loves you the most is also the most capable of destroying your sense of reality. Not because she is cruel, not because she chose you specifically to suffer, but because of something happening deep inside her nervous system that she cannot name, cannot see, and would never consciously choose to act on. The man she manipulates the least is the man she feels the least for. And if you sit with that single sentence long enough, it will quietly reframe every confusing relationship you have ever tried to make sense of. If you have ever felt the most doubted, the most destabilized, the most emotionally exhausted by a woman who also looked at you like you were her entire world, you did not imagine it, and what you are about to understand will not just explain her behavior, it will permanently change the way you read every relationship you have ever had and everyone still ahead of you. You have been taught your entire life that manipulation is the language of people who do not care. The cold ex who played games, the woman who used silence as a slow and deliberate weapon, and you filed it under toxic and told yourself you had learned your lesson. But here is exactly what that framework cost you. It made you completely blind to the most important psychological truth in all of intimate relationships, which is that the deeper her emotional attachment to you, the more her primitive brain begins to perceive you as a direct threat to her psychological survival. Not her physical survival, but the survival of the self she has spent her entire life carefully building and protecting through every difficult season she endured, long before she ever knew your name. When something threatens that self, when you become important enough to threaten that self, her mind does not pause and respond with logic or with honest conversation. It responds with control. And what you spent years calling manipulation was never a calculated strategy, but a distress signal from a nervous system that did not yet know how to ask for what it actually needed. When a woman falls deeply for a man, her brain releases elevated levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, the same chemical your body floods with right before a threat response activates. Not because love feels intellectually dangerous, but because the limbic brain, the ancient emotional processing center buried deep beneath conscious thought, cannot distinguish between profound attachment and profound vulnerability. And so, to that part of her biology, needing you and being endangered by you feel neurologically identical. You have seen this exact pattern play out in your own life. The woman who pulled closest right before she pushed hardest, the one who told you she loved you on a quiet evening and then picked a fight about nothing the very next morning. And that was not emotional inconsistency or poor character, but a nervous system desperately trying to regulate a feeling that had grown too large to hold without some kind of armor around it. Because the woman who never destabilizes you never truly needed you. Behavioral science calls the next layer of this attachment anxiety, a psychological state where the fear of abandonment becomes so deeply activated that a person unconsciously creates conflict to confirm the relationship is strong enough to survive conflict. And she does not know she is doing it. This subconscious behavior runs entirely beneath the surface of her awareness, like a background program she never agreed to install. Which is why you remember that argument that arrived with no rational origin, that sudden emotional withdrawal that appeared precisely when things between you were finally going well. Because she was not attempting to hurt you in those moments, but running a survival test on the most important emotional structure in her world. And that structure was you. Evolutionary psychology adds the final layer with remarkable clarity. Emotional regulation, the genuine ability to sit inside an overwhelming feeling without immediately acting from it, was not a skill universally taught or safe to practice across most of human history, and so the result carried silently forward through generations of attachment patterns is a woman who experiences deep love as deep exposure, which is why she criticizes the way you speak, because she cannot say she is afraid you will find someone better. Why she goes cold after intimacy, because she cannot say she has never let anyone this close. And why she creates distance at the exact moment she needed closeness most, because that closeness itself triggered something far older than your relationship, something written onto her nervous system long before your name meant anything to her. Her behavior follows a map, and that map was drawn in childhood, long before she had the language to describe what was being written onto her. Attachment theory, the scientific framework explaining how early bonds with caregivers shape every intimate relationship that follows, tells us that a person's entire capacity for emotional safety is formed before the age of 5. Before she could reason or articulate, she learned whether closeness led to warmth or withdrawal, whether needing someone was safe, or whether it always eventually cost her something she could not afford to lose. And you are not her partner in those moments of subconscious behavior, but a stand-in for every person who ever taught her that loving someone deeply meant becoming dangerously exposed. Her nervous system does not update in real time. It runs on old code, written in a language she did not choose and was never given the tools to rewrite. And the most disorienting part, the part that will quietly reframe every confusing memory you carry from your most significant relationships, is that this activation only happens at depth, because she can be calm and consistent with men she feels only moderately connected to. And the emotional chaos, the contradiction, the psychological weather that left you exhausted and quietly questioning your own perception, that only ever emerged with the man who reached the part of her she had kept locked and untouched for years. Which means you were not being punished for being the wrong man, but tested, repeatedly and without mercy, because some part of her nervous system recognized that you were exactly the right one. The man who carries this understanding forward into his next conversation, his next relationship, his next moment of confusion, is not the same man who pressed play, because you are no longer reading behavior at face value, but seeing the architecture beneath the action, understanding that her silence is a nervous system asking a question it has not yet learned to speak, that her sharpness arrives precisely at the moment she feels most exposed, that the woman who loves you most will at times make you feel the least certain about where you stand, and that this is not a contradiction, but the oldest and most consistent equation in the entire history of human attachment. This does not mean you absorb what causes you genuine harm, or become her therapist, or carry the full weight of her unresolved history across your own shoulders, because you are not a rescue operation, and understanding her psychology does not obligate you to sacrifice your own stability. But you are now a man who cannot be dismantled by behavior he fully understands, and there is a specific, unmistakable stillness that develops in a man when emotional chaos stops reading as a personal attack and begins reading as information, when he becomes grounded where other men become reactive, quietly curious where other men become defensive. And that stillness, that unhurried, deeply rooted presence, is paradoxically the exact thing her nervous system has been searching for across every relationship she has ever tried to hold together. Not a man who rescues her, but a man who remains completely unmoved by the storm she generates, specifically to see whether he will stay. The woman who loves you the most is also the most capable of destabilizing you. And now you understand precisely why, and precisely what it means about the kind of man you have always been. If this reached something real inside you, subscribe and come back, because the next video goes somewhere even deeper, somewhere most men are not yet ready to look.